Hey everyone, my name is Raul, and this is Elin, and we both work at Spotify. And today we want to share a story about how we build a better experimentation platform by leveraging cross-disciplinary teams and breaking silos. But before we get started, how many times have you asked yourself questions such as, if only they had talked to each other a bit more, or if only iOS and Android developers had sat down and went through the API design before implementing that, right? Or even if backend developers had double-checked the schema with the client developers. We also have those questions at Spotify. And especially when it comes to those systems that are developed in siloed environments. For example, backend engineers designing a system that is very hard to be used by mobile developers, or vice versa.
Yeah, and an example of such a system at Spotify was our old A/B testing system that we call ABBA. So ABBA is based on feature flagging, event logging on our clients and on our servers, and has a web page for setting up and analyzing experiments. And it was built pretty exclusively by backend developers in a data infrastructure tribe. And what we noticed is as this system grew over time, this team of backend developers were making assumptions about things like how to set up feature flags and how to run tests that didn't really work on the platforms that ABBA was supposed to support, in particular for mobile. And since we like running experiments at Spotify, we realized we have to do something about this, and we decided to sit down and rebuild our experimentation platform. And now, given that we had this system already that made us go like, ugh, if they'd only talk to each other, we figured, why not just take everyone and put them in the same team and have them work on it together? So we put together a cross-disciplinary team to solve this problem. So we made sure we had backend engineers, data engineers, web, mobile, you name it, to build a better system than ABBA. And both me and Raul worked on one of these teams as mobile engineers, and we built something that we called remote configuration. And remote configuration was a replacement for the feature flagging mechanism within the previous system. It revolves around remotely configurable properties and aspects of our applications, our servers, and by changing the values that those properties can have, it allowed us to compare the effects that this had on our Spotify users and do experimentation. So with that, we learned a lot in working in this team, and we wanted to share some lessons and learnings about working in cross-disciplinary teams to build better software.
So the first thing that we did was to leverage the power of common abstractions. So we start out by sketching the full system design and the interface between the clients and the backend. Given the siloed background of our engineers in the team, the only way that we could do that was by having common abstractions for the problem scope, so that we could communicate efficiently without getting stuck on implementation details or some specifics of the disciplines. Whiteboarding and system design sketching was very important here for us, because they led us to share common understanding of what we were building together without needing to share discipline-specific expertise. For example, one time we found ourselves asking when and how we should update the values for the configuration properties. And then we decided to create the concept of succession, like this abstract concept. Updating the values once per session meant that the UI wouldn't change while the user was using our app. On mobile, the session was tied to the life cycle of the app. On the web, they really didn't have a life cycle, but they could see when the user was closing or opening the web browser, or even when the web cookies was expired. On the other hand, for backend, that was a bit different because they didn't have a concept of a user or a life cycle, but they did have a request. So then that's what you used. For us, our request was a session, and that we had our common abstraction of a session that we could communicate around. The second thing that we learned was about learning and sharing and growing together. There are many differences between web, machine learning, backend, mobile, And that affects the way that we work as engineers. At Spotify, the backend is split up in thousands of microservices. Our mobile apps, they share huge monorepos, and more than 100 developers, they work in the same monorepo. Also, backend microservices at Spotify, we can deploy them worldwide in a matter of seconds. And our mobile apps, we have them released in a weekly cadence.
Yeah, and these are constraints that we need to take into consideration when building out our software. And while we found the abstractions that we came up with were very helpful to allow us to communicate across our platform boundaries, also taking the time to really learn how we work differently based on our different backgrounds also proved very, very useful. For instance, one of the main problems that we had with the old ABBA system was that feature flags weren't reusable. And that was fine for web and backend because they had control over how they deployed and who were using what version of their software. On mobile, if you messed up setting up a feature flag, that would delay the experiment by weeks because you would have to wait for a new mobile release and then people to actually start using that release. So we learned from that, and then in the new system, we made sure that properties on the web were reusable so that we wouldn't face this problem again. But then we also knew that we wouldn't add that complexity to backend and web because they didn't really need it. And the last thing was that by finding these common abstractions and growing and really learning to trust each other within these teams, we could really utilize our shared expertise and build a great product. Compared to the old ABBA system, our new experimentation platform has really clear separation of concerns. We have idiomatic solutions for things like remote configuration, for experimentation analysis, for data collection, etc. And we know all of these things because we've managed to answer all of those, if they'd only talk to each other, problems that arose with the early ABBA system.
However, this wasn't a journey of only all unicorns and magic feuds. Setting up the teams was really a hard work for us. And it took us much longer than expected to release that platform. The first plans that we had was to ship that in a matter of months, but actually took closer to 1 year. It took time to learn how and the specifics of each platform and how they are different from each other. It also took us some time to understand that the developers, they were thinking about the same problems, but on different ways because they have different perspectives. It was only after all of that time together that we really felt comfortable to make compromises and trade-offs across disciplines. It took us strong technical leadership and guidance to make us feel comfortable and to trust each other, and also to trust the product that we are building together.
And also, the truth is, having cross-disciplinary teams doesn't work for everything. Infrastructure in particular is one of those things where you're dealing with problems that only face backend developers or only face web developers. Both me and Raul now work on mobile infrastructure teams, and we're only solving problems for mobile developers. But one of the things that we took back from this experience and this other team we worked on, that it wasn't really the power of the cross-disciplinary team that allowed us to be successful. It was the fact that we had a diverse set of perspectives on the same problem that we were facing, and that we were solving more of the problem for more people. And the practices that we've talked about, having common abstractions of whiteboarding and visualization, that allowed us to understand each other and talk in a language that we all understood. Learning and growing together meant that we felt safe to share our different ideas, knowing that we would listen to each other and incorporate all of the learnings into our new platform. So really, this wasn't actually a story about how a cross-disciplinary team in particular built a great product, but how we had a diverse team, and allowing that diverse team and those diverse perspectives to really impact the product that we were building made us build great software together. So thank you.
Thank you.